Okay, so I often get the question about synchronizing an audio file with lighting commands on QLC Plus. My preferred way of synchronizing audio and light cues is to use Midi files. So you have to use another piece of software like a cue control program to play back the audio cue and then also play back the Midi file. So what we're trying to do here is have a Midi file that's going to send Midi commands to QLC Plus at particular times to turn lights on and off or to press buttons, etc. So that way we can synchronize. So the problem arises in, okay, how do we create the Midi file? Now I had done another tutorial on this where I used a DAW, and I had been thinking about this and thinking, there's got to be an easier way to create that Midi file rather than learning all this stuff about the DAW and opening and closing windows and that. So I think I finally found it. This is kind of a standalone Midi editor, and I'll put a link to this below. It's called Brell's Midi Editor version 0.08. And it's just a really little easy program. You don't have to even install it. It runs out of a folder, and it lets you create MIDI files so that we can create then a MIDI sequence file to go along with our audio file and synchronize that with the lighting. So the MIDI file is going to be sending commands to QLC Plus, and we're going to use the program to play both the audio and the MIDI file simultaneously. So while the audio is playing, the program's also sending MIDI commands over to QLC Plus. All right, let's take a look at our MIDI program here for a moment. So just a couple of things. I don't have to learn too much about this, but one of the things you're going to want to do to make it easier to see, these are your piano keys, whites and blacks. What I did was take this up to about 250. Just makes it easier to see them. In my case, I had pre-planned, I have 8 buttons that I was going to activate in QLC Plus. So I was going to use the notes C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, and G. Use those musical MIDI notes to activate buttons over in QLC Plus. Up at the top here I have my audio file, and I'm showing this in Audacity. I'll put a link to that, but I think a lot of people know about this program already. The reason I need to do this is I need to find out the precise timing of where these musical hits are when I want my lights to come on and off. So Audacity allows me to do that. Here's my MIDI file. Let me see if I can play back a little bit for you here. So you can see the hits in here are very apparent. You can actually see them. So the nice thing about this is I set my window down here to hours, minutes, seconds, and hundredths of a second. Now I can click anywhere in my audio file, like here for example, and it will tell me that my cursor is currently at 0.62 hundredths of a second. So a little bit more than a half a second. Now that tells me where I need to place my note command down here. Now something we have to do down here, because audio programs work in hours, minutes, seconds, hundredths, or hours, minutes, second, milliseconds. This is a music writing program, so we're going to be talking about beats and quarters of a beat and halves of a beat, that kind of thing. So what we're going to need to do to get this to coordinate, we need each beat to be at the speed of a second. So I'm going to set this up. It's a little time clock here, and you click over the beginning, click here, and tell it that you want beats per minute, you want to change this to 60, and then say OK. So actually then every beat here is 1 second. So that allows us to line things up a little bit more. But you're going back and forth between like 2 systems of measurement. So for example, and I've already created my file here. Here's my first note that I put in. So I need my first hit to be at 0.62. It's a little bit more than a half a second. Where if we're looking here, here's 1 second. So here's a quarter of a second. Here's a half a second. Here's 3/4 of a second. And here's 1 full second. So I need this to be just a little bit more than a half of a second. So I placed my MIDI note right here. And placing MIDI notes on here is very, very, very easy. What I recommended is just click on the 8th note symbol up here. Actually, I guess I picked maybe 16th note. And you just simply place this note where you want it to be and click, and then the note just appears right there. So if I needed a note here, I just click and it's right there. It's very, very simple. So that gives us a note off and a note on command to work with QLC Plus. Now if I select the note again, actually I go to my selection box here, select the note, hit delete to get rid of it. So it's that easy. If you're on a note and you're actually in edit mode here, when you go back to edit mode, you can drag notes around and change their pitch. Down here is velocity that we don't have to worry about. So basically, make sure you set this to 60, enlarge your keyboard so you can see what you're doing. Put this at 16 ticks and make sure you change the timing to 60. So now you can see I've actually gone through and created all of my note commands that I need. For example, my second hit here I need to happen somewhere around the vicinity of 4 seconds, 0.99. So that's pretty much 5 seconds. So you can see that my note command here is happening right at 5 seconds. That's very, very close to that. Then my next hit I'm going to want to be here, which is about 9 seconds and 3800. So it's like about 9 and a little more than a quarter second. So let's see what I did with that, where I put that one. Here's my 9, here's a quarter, and here's a little bit further than a quarter. So you start to see how I placed all my cues. Now, I did different pitches. My first note over here was a C. Then this is a C sharp. Then this is a D, and etc. So I've gone through and I've created my entire sequence file, different pitches. And then once you've created this, it's very, very easy. You just go up here and you click on Save the current composition. I've already given this a name. You just say save it, and you save it as a MIDI file. And then you can pull it into your sound playback program and have that send MIDI commands over to QLC Plus to make things activate. So I think this is a real easy solution because this program is so easy to use. Okay, just a quick tutorial here. The Brel's MIDI editor, when you unzip it, it's going to come out in a folder that looks like this. Double click, open the folder, and just scroll down here and look for MIDI edit exe, double click, and the program will start up and you're good to go. And then what I've done is put it in a window by itself, located it down the bottom, and then I put Audacity over the top where I'm looking at my audio file so I can create my sequence cues and align them with the audio file. Okay, so what you're looking at here is my QLC program running over here, and I have the display of the lights in the grid here. And then here's my sound program, sound cueing program or show control program. It's going to be playing back the wave sound, but it's also going to be playing back the MIDI file simultaneously. And then the MIDI file will send note signals over to QLC Plus to activate buttons or activate cues or move ahead in the cue list here. One program that you will need to connect these up is a program called Loopy if you're running them on the same computer. So I'll put a listing to that below. Loopy basically gives me an internal MIDI connection so that I can send MIDI signals from this program over to this program. If you're running these on two separate computers, so if we have the show control program running on one computer and QLC Plus running on another, then you're going to actually have to use physical MIDI cables between the two. So you could get a USB MIDI device and connect one to the other laptop. There also is a possibility of doing MIDI over Ethernet, but some way you'd have to find a way of sending MIDI signals from one computer to the other. But for this demo here, I'm just running both programs on the same computer and using a Loopy as an internal MIDI connection to send MIDI signals from here over to this program. Let's take a look at QLC Plus once real quick. So when I look at the inputs and outputs, you'll see that I have as inputs, I have loop B internal MIDI selected. So that's the internal MIDI cable. Then also what I needed to do, I just basically have some 4 lights there, red, green, blue, amber, white, UV. And I just created some color scenes with them. Aqua, black, blue, green, pink, red, white, yellow, etc. And then I took the same scenes and put them in a cue list so I can show you 2 different ways of going about this. So then in my virtual console, I have buttons that I'm going to activate with MIDI signals. And then I was going to show you another way to do this. I have a cue list with scenes in it that I'm going to activate the next cue command with the MIDI signal also. Now, what I had to do here is somehow tell these buttons, okay, what MIDI note is going to activate what button. So for this, you go in and do a profile, and I'll take a quick look at this. Let's go back to inputs and outputs really quickly. And you'll notice the profile tab up here. If you click on that, what I did is I created a profile so that I could say, these are the MIDI notes that you can expect to come into the computer. And then I can connect them to various buttons or different commands in the virtual console. So if you select this and then click the edit command, you'll see that it comes up. I gave it a generic name in the model, just red, green, blue, amber, white. It could be whatever because you're going to create this profile yourself. Now if you look at the channels, you can see what I've done here. Let me just double click on this one and we can take a look. This is going to be an on-off command. And it's coming from C1. This is the lowest C note. This is where sometimes there's a little bit of confusion because if you remember from the sequencer, the lowest note on the sequencer was called C0. Well, in QLC Plus, they call the lowest note C1. So just keep in mind that it is the lowest C note. So I'm basically creating a connection here that when the computer receives the MIDI note C, that we can connect that to something. I'm telling it to expect this as a MIDI command that's coming in. And then I've done the same thing here, like for green, this is a C sharp. So it's very easy, you just click note on, note off. I can actually show you one here, I'll create a new one. So I'm just going to say create a new button. I want to come down here and say that this is going to be a note on and off command. Now here I have to choose what note that is going to be coming in. So I've already used several of these notes. So I'm going to click up and notice as I'm changing the note that it's changing the MIDI assignment number that QLC gives to it. So I'm going to say G0 and say OK to expect that. Now notice I didn't give it a name, which I should have. I can double click it and put up, and I'll just put example. So I've created that button there, example. Now I've created several different notes so that when I send these note signals in, QLC is going to be able to attach them to something. So now let's take a look at how you attach them. We go back to the virtual console. What you simply do is you click on a button when we're in edit mode here, or double click on it, opens up in edit mode, and then I can choose up here my external input. I'm going to choose, and there's my profile that I made up. And I'm going to just choose my Aqua, which is 133. Now that gets assigned to there. So I've done that. I've assigned these different MIDI connections to these buttons. So when QLC receives the C0 command, it's going to turn on the red. When it receives C sharp, it's going to turn on the green. When it receives D, it's going to turn on the blue, etc. So we're set up and ready to go there. Now for the cue list, this just needs an advance command. So same thing here. I'm going to double click it to edit it. And I'm going to do the next cue command. And then I assign, I'm going to say choose. And that was my next cue command, or cue advance here, that I choose. And that is actually the note F. It's the second F though. It's not F0, it's F1. From the sequencer, QLC Plus looks at it as F2. So anytime this receives that F to MIDI note, it's going to advance in the cue list. All right, so now let's take a look how we make this work. Cue control program I'm using is Multiplay. I will put a link down below. The nice thing about this Multiplay, you don't have to install it. It just runs from a folder. I'm actually going to do a couple of videos about using Multiplay so you can understand where to get it and how to use it. But very useful program. It's free of charge, no cost. It does what we needed to do in that it can play back WAV files, and then it can also play back MIDI files. So again, I've got this all set up so that it's going to be playing my heroic WAV file, and then under my MIDI sequence I've got this set up. You're going to want to look at the tutorials for how to set this up so that it's sending the MIDI signals out on the loop B connection. So when I play this file up here, it's going to also play this MIDI file in connection with that, and the MIDI file is going to send signals over to QLC Plus to activate the buttons, and we'll see how that works. I'm going to start up my QLC Plus. I'm in my first cue here, so here we go. And you can see it activated, first cue, and it's activating the cues in time because I set up my sequence file. So it's actually pressing the buttons. The MIDI commands are being sent, and they're actually pressing the buttons or activating the buttons for me. And you can see the lights changing down there. So you get the idea. I'm just going to stop that file. Now, one thing you're going to want to do when you want the two files to run simultaneously, and I'll just talk about that quickly here. Let me turn off my green lights. Go back to this. So I'm click on the heroic WAV file and right click it and do cue properties. And one of the things I'm telling it to do is don't just advance to the next cue. Normally that would be the command start advance. I want you to go to the next cue and play it, so that the WAV file and the MIDI sequence file run at the same time so that we can coordinate that. And then what I also had to do, and you might find yourself having to do this, to get the timing exactly correct. The sequence file timing is correct. It's just a matter of getting the two files to start at the same time. So I did have to put a little, here's my sequence file, and I'll right click on that. I had to put a 1 second delay in on this file to get it to line up with the WAV file above it. Okay, so you can play with that delay on your sequence file and get that to run. That's how you would tweak it to get both files to run at the same time. So if you're having issues where your MIDI notes and your hits in the music aren't lining up, you may have to play around a little bit with the delay times for the MIDI sequence to get it to actually line up where you want it to line up. But it's really, really easy with this program to do that. You just put in some delay time there. Now, the second example I want to do, here's the same audio file, but this time we're just going to be firing the note F2. And if you remember, we use that F2 command to go forward in this cue list. So one of the things I have to do now, to get the cue list started, I'll have to click down here. Although you could use a MIDI command if you wanted to get the cue list started. Use one MIDI command to activate this button, and then another MIDI command to do the next cue button. All I did was just do the next cue button for this example. But anyway, so let me just start the cue list. And see our first cue comes up. And these are all fade in, so you'll see them fading in. Now I'll start my list here. And you're going to see that it will be firing the cues over here by sending that F2 command. Going to the next cue. So this is a possibility too. Instead of doing individual buttons, if you would like to just put all of your light changes in a cue list, you could have the cue control program over here just keep firing go commands to your cue list and progressing through your cue list in that way. So it's just an alternative way of doing it if you'd like to do it in that fashion. and either way will work. All right. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what you need to do then when you're trying to synchronize an audio file and get your lighting to line up perfectly with that audio file. I think this is a easier solution than going and opening up a whole DAW, just because the Midi program that we're using to create the sequence is very, very easy to use. So, and again, show control. This is my favorite way of doing that because you can do a lot more with the audio cues, and audio playback's a lot better here. And it's not all that difficult to have it send the Midi commands over to here to coordinate and synchronize your lighting.